I'm Jeff, and I am a Xennial. And Cull would be pleased to hear his blood stirs strong in the line of kings. Today we are going to do a quick review of Conan the Barbarian, trade paperback, Volume 1, bound in black stone by Heroic Signatures and Titan Comics. This trade came out in 2023, and it is the start of the current ongoing Conan series, notably marking its return to the more sort of pulpy indie publisher from its previous home over at Marvel Comics. This book was written by Jim Zub of the Dungeons & Dragon comic book and Champions comic fame. Some fame, I'd say. And with art by Roberto de la Torre of Daredevil or Iron Man, you might know him from. It's a solid team. Those guys have been around doing Marvel books and other things for a while. I just learned today that Jim Zub is one of the creators of Snowguard, I think is the name of the character. Someone I was not familiar with, but it's always good to have more Canadian superheroes. Anyway, this Conan book is really designed to be a fresh start for Conan as it left Marvel and is now starting at Titan. It is a great opportunity for new readers to jump on board with the Conan storyline. They are currently up to around issue 20, 25 maybe, so it hasn't been running for too long. This trade collects a prologue, like a short half story, which I think was part of a free comic book day launch, and then the first 4 issues, which marks the first story arc, bound in Blackstone. If you are interested in sword and sorcery as a genre, maybe you've been playing D&D or want to dip your toes into this kind of fantasy world, Conan is probably the best place to start. He's widely considered the greatest barbarian character of all time and is truly a chaotic good archetype. Conan is strong. Conan is resourceful. Conan has this ingrained sense of personal justice. And he really stands apart as a character, created in the 1930s with people still reeling from the Great Depression. Conan is he's really an anti-hero, kind of a gritty character that sort of rails against the sort of institutional hegemony of the system, that oppresses all of the smaller people in the world. Conan is a true survivor, right? He's this self-determined character that people who are really struggling can look up to. He's kind of aspirational despite the ultra violence. He's this, self-determined character. He has agency, a willingness to do what it takes, and a toughness to deal with this crazy world all around him. And he doesn't take crap from people. His resilience is something that I think people can really look up to. And that sort of raging against injustice perhaps is kind of cathartic for us to read into our heroes. So I would suggest that Conan is just as resonant today as he was back in the olden times. Conan is from a really different world than we live in now, the Hyborian Age. It's this sort of magical yesteryear, an indeterminate time that's sort of set apart, based on reality, but really a step aside, in the same way that Tolkien's Middle-earth has its own sort of frequency. So too does this Hyborian Age in the world of Conan. As a character, Conan has been around for a long, long time, of course, and been in lots of novels and comic books, of course, kind of this kind of pulp hero, perfect for that medium. And as someone who really likes and appreciates these kind of stories, if you look at other heroes, like I've got this Doc Savage book here, or Buck Rogers, some of these guys just don't stand the test of time quite as well. Maybe it's because they're set in such a specific time and place that is sort of rooted more solidly in a world that we know. Those kind of that idyllic science hero of that time doesn't really stand up. Like, the Shadow could only ever exist in 1930s New York. Let's not talk about Batman. But the Shadow could only ever exist in 1930s New York. It's not 1930s New York anymore. But when the Shadow came out, it was 1930s in New York. So he was a hero of the time. Conan has always been removed in a different place, and that's why I sort of liken it to the Hobbits and the stories of Middle-earth, in that Conan's world is always going to be this very distinct, timeless kind of place. So it doesn't age as poorly, I think, as some of these other, heroes from back in the day who you may have to do sort of backflips to get them to work in a modern context. See Batman. Conan's world is also a prototype for what fantasy stories would become later on. But Conan's stories, while there's oftentimes magic, demons and black magic and scary stuff involved, it's not central. It's not required. They're more like tonal aspects to the story, not a centerpiece to the story in and of itself. You could just as easily have a Conan story that is not rooted in anything crazy fantastical, and it would be just as good, I would say. Maybe it's easiest to just say that the fantasy is used kind of sparingly. It's baked into the world, of course, but those elements that go above and beyond, it's a frost giant or it's a ghost, those are secondary to the real driving points of the plot, which are about characters, rooted in their day-to-day desires and struggles, and the kind of very real world grounded good versus evil that Conan faces every day in regular sort of situations. This aesthetic and approach to Conan is well translated, I think, into this trade. The first arc, the Bound in Blackstone arc, which I believe is an original story. I think that this comic is all original stories, not direct pulls from anything that has been previously written. It's not an adaptation, is what I'm trying to say. But it tonally feels very Conan. So the story, of course, follows Conan, a rough and tough adventurer. He's been traveling the world for some indeterminate amount of time now, and the story begins. He comes to a Quilonian outpost up in the north, almost as far north as his homeland. Trying to gain some respite there, he's interrupted by a Pictish warrior woman coming breathlessly into the outpost on horseback, telling tales of a ghoulish army that's on its way, marching towards them. After a nightmarish sort of standoff with this army, Conan and this Pict warrior woman, Brissa, who is a new character, I believe, created for this story, team up to try and uncover the mystery around what this army is doing and the evil forces that are behind them. So from that description, I hope that you will take that this is a strong and somewhat unsettling story about heroes on a very desperate journey to uncover a kind of horrific mystery. I love that Conan is here fighting against his perceptions of injustice. I love the, hints at destiny and the placing of Conan in a larger mythology, in a larger history. And that sort of ongoing common theme with Conan around the sort of like the freedom of barbarism versus the, institutionalization of civilization, and how it necessarily seems to corrupt. Conan and the other characters that he fights alongside in this book are, frankly, tough as hell. They are badass and very, very violent. When I met Jim Zub at Toronto Comic Con this year, I got the book from him actually, and he signed it, which was very nice of him. He told me about, bringing this book over from Marvel and really like taking the gloves off, I think is how he put it, from what, would be ever allowed with the character in a Marvel Comics setting. So this may be a little more violent than some readers are used to, and this is definitely not a book for the faint of heart. In fact, some of the horror elements, and I would never say that this is a horror book, but the horror elements and some of the art are like legitimately unsettling. Personally, I gravitate towards kind of clean pop art style, cartoony kind of comics. However, that would be wholly inappropriate for a Conan book. Roberto de la Torre really approaches this with an almost painted Frank Frazetta kind of a look, that's appropriate for Conan. And the ultraviolence shines through, despite the muted coloring and the palette being very subdued across the book. I do find it a little tough, some of the sort of, like, there's a lot of action in a Conan book, as you would want. But there's this sort of tangled, kinetic, like, big mess that I personally find a little hard to always follow through the action. And I don't think that that's necessarily anything wrong with the book. I think perhaps that's just me being less familiar with following this kind of an approach to the direction. That said, I do think that what's on the page here is clearly appropriate for Conan. It is very violent. There's lots of hacking and blood and splattering, and exactly what I think fans of Conan would want, even if at times it maybe goes a little intense for me. That said, especially when it comes to some of the more mystical elements, shall we say, and no spoilers, but like, it gets into some pretty weird places, this story. And I really, really liked that stuff a lot. Overall, I really liked this book. I would recommend it. I think that if you are a lapsed Conan fan like me, interested in getting back into it like me, that maybe this is a very good place to, dip your toes back into Conan storytelling. I read the Conan books when I was in my 20s, and one of the things I really wanted to do with this YouTube channel, which is, pretty new still, is I'd love to dive more into sword and sorcery content, particularly Conan, because I really enjoyed reading those books. I have a lot of nostalgia for them, but I haven't read them in 20 years. So I'd love to get back into that. And I think that the comic medium is, of course, perfect for this kind of classic pulp hero. Ultimately, there's something that's just plain appealing about this big, brutish Conan, and it's not just his resourcefulness. It's his strong moral code, I think, honestly, that does it. It's a violent world that he lives in, and yes, he is a violent man in that world, but that's appropriate. He's always driven by what he thinks is right, and despite the danger, he's brave. That's something that I think that we can all, aspire to, facing fears in a really chaotic and uncertain world that we live in, with strength and bravery. So, with that said, I definitely recommend it, and I suggest you check it out if you're interested in Conan. There'll be links below to where you can pick it up, but this is available everywhere you buy books. So, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this review. Feel free to check out the rest of the channel for more comic talk and other shenanigans, and I will certainly be back talking more Conan at some point in the near future. See y'all later. Bye-bye.